Hey, this is Rob, and this is episode 46 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing. So I'll just get right back into the conversation we were having.
Okay.
I'm here with Andrew Miller, founder and partner of Cafe Imports, to put this into context. But we've only met a couple times, and the first time was 3 years ago. This was a really pivotal time for Folly because this is when I had become obsessed with specialty coffee for about 3 years at this point. And it was a pivotal moment where I was working for Sam Adams, and I was like, I really like my job. I really like what I'm doing, but this just, it's compelling, and it just kept pulling me in. And so this is when I started to look at, well, what would the logistics of starting a business in Minnesota be, where I'm originally from? And so I just literally Googled Minneapolis coffee importer so I could learn more about importing. And at the time, completely oblivious to the coffee, like the professional side of the coffee world, Cafe Imports popped up. I was like, whoa, there's actually a coffee importer in Minneapolis. I email the generic info email and get a response from the owner, Andrew Miller. And so to be completely honest with you, when I got a really quick response from the owner, I'm like, oh, this must be a super, super small kind of like boutique-y, somebody like passion project kind of thing. And then I showed up for you to give me the tour, and I see what Cafe Imports is. It's super impressive. And the warehouse is like, even now to this day, you see people posting on their Instagrams of their roasters, the facility you have of all the green you're importing from around the world. And that always stuck with me, that I was like, whoa, even though he's been doing it since 1993 and he has one of the country's premier specialty coffee importers, he responded to the info email and gave some guy he's never met saying, hey, I'm not in coffee, but I'm thinking about roasting. And it wasn't a 5-minute tour. We were talking for an hour. You drove me from the office to, and that always stuck with me. And that was the first time we met. And then it's been in passing. One time at the, you guys throw awesome events when those were a thing. And from the AeroPress competition to the just the big party you threw for everybody. And I've always just respected what you've done in business. And even though Cafe Imports is this massive, in my world, being a really small roaster, importer of specialty coffee, that you're so ingrained in the community and you're always looking to build that out. And so with that long-winded intro of how we met, welcome to the Folly Coffee Podcast studio.
Thank you.
Do I have that right? 1993?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So how do you get in the 93? Is it still pretty much like a second wave world? Like Starbucks is still going gangbusters, and that's kind of the coffee that people see as like really great coffee.
Yeah, exactly. I think in 93, Caribou opened up in Minneapolis. So that was, specialty coffee was sort of coming here. There were roasters that had always been here, but they were kind of commercial kind of things. But specialty coffee was happened on this kind of on the West Coast and then started moving east. And when Caribou kind of, opened up here, we were just, my original partner was a guy named Jose Vito, a Brazilian dude. And he and I worked together in a restaurant, and it was really his idea. Because his dad was a coffee farmer. Have you heard this story?
I have not.
Okay, so Vito, when I worked in a fine dining Italian restaurant together, I was going to school. He was out of school, but he was from Brazil, so his dad was a farmer. He grew up around coffee. He sees this thing happening. He gets some samples from his dad. We take it to like Jim Cameron and Coffee Teen Lee and European Roastery, and they said that it was good coffee. So I was helping him with his English primarily, just like because I'm an English major, so I was helping him write letters of introduction, business plan, that kind of stuff. And then we decided to do it together to open up a business. I borrowed $70,000 from my mother-in-law, and we bought a container of coffee.
So when you're tasting the coffee that he brought over, at this time, it sounds like you weren't like a huge coffee nerd. What was your first impression of tasting the coffee that he had brought over?
Yeah, we didn't really know what we were doing. I mean, the thing is that so I was a server at D'Amico Cucina, which is like I said, a fine dining Italian place, and we had bottles of Chianti that were $20, and Rosso di Montalcino that's $60, and then a Barolo that's $300. And we had gone through the training to understand what does that. Is it and there's acidity and body and flavor and all those kind of similar components. And also it's the place, the terroir, where it comes from, that kind of makes them different. So we had a good sense of how things taste and what's good, but really didn't know what we were doing. But our first trip to Brazil, we went and did a cupping with the guy who exported the coffee for us. So it was pretty telling and got us down that path.
How long of a process are we talking about from you meeting at the kitchen to him bringing some coffee to saying, hey, maybe we should start doing this?
It was pretty quick. I think we decided and we incorporated in March of 1993. And then so Brazil's harvesting in June. And I think that coffee was on the water in July when there was a frost. So we bought that coffee for the C market was like 90 cents. Mm-hmm. And then there's a frost and the market went to $3. So it just, we sold it immediately. And being English major, not a business major, when the market was at the top, we bought 2 more. And then it collapsed. So it took me like years to pay back my mother-in-law. So that was not great. And then we found out she was bipolar. So she was like really excited when she gave me the money. And then she was just crying and laying on the couch when I couldn't pay her back. So, Christmas and Easter kind of sucked.
And so you're just going door to door with green coffee saying, we brought this in from Brazil.
Yeah.
What was the process of importing like? Was that kind of sorted out because he had the relationship with the farm, or did you have to learn how to do the full importing process? And how much has that changed since 93?
We had to learn how to do it, and you can basically just find a freight forwarder and someone to, it was a learning experience, but you had to buy a customs bond, and then you get someone to kind of do the clearing and importing it for you. And to be honest, I think we still do that. We use somebody else to do the clear the customs for us, but it's a lot more complicated now because of all the other origins and the kind of the state of the world, just Africa and Indonesia, coffee's coming in. It's more complicated. I mean, now there's a team of 4 that just do that.
I was going to say, I went to a presentation at Cafe Imports about importing.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, because it seems so simple. It's just you take the coffee, get it through imports, but you realize all the different steps that go into it.
Yeah.
I mean, cargo, freight, everything. And then not even to mention like political and cultural climates of coming in and out of country. And I mean, hearing coffee coming out of a landlocked Nicaragua and what it takes to get it here. And I can't imagine being a logistics person in coffee. And then someone's like, when will it be here? And you're like, people who are used to Amazon where it's like, it'll be here at this time. It's like, hopefully next month or around this time. Well, as people are trying to plan calendars.
Yeah.
And so you're going around with this coffee, knocking on doors. Are these connections you had within the industry, or how are you finding the people first to even show?
So we started locally, selling coffee to Ed Dunn was a great customer, European Roastery, B&W Roasters. The guys are kind of still, they're sort of still around, but they were kind of Ed Dunn was kind of one of the early kind of hippie pioneers of specialty coffee around here, because that's, he and his brother used to play, guitars in their cafe at night. They were like aging groovies, but he cared about, exotic coffees, good Antiquas and good, Brazils and that kind of stuff. So that was pretty easy because we were here and we had it and we would deliver it. So where these guys had historically been buying their coffee from the West Coast and having it freighted in. So it was a lot easier for them. And
it's funny when you think about Minnesota. I've always said this the past years I've been in coffee. I go, it goes super under the radar as a coffee place. I never think of like the impact that Minnesota has had not only within the Midwest, but when you look at someone like a Cameron's who just had a massive sale, Caribou who years ago had the massive sale, and Cafe Imports being here. And it's funny because when I tell people, they go, where do you get your coffee? And I go, well, one of our primary importers is just north of Minneapolis. And they're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
You go, yeah, no, it's if you're a specialty coffee worker, you've probably worked with Cafe Imports in some sense. Yeah. And it's like I don't know if you call it a hidden giant because but it's so funny to tell people that. And that's how I started Folly. And the funny thing is you're working with really big established roasters, but you're still willing to work with me as I'm like, hey, is it cool if I pull my RAV4 up to the back and this is really embarrassing, but can I just buy 1 bag? It's all I need right now and that'll last me a couple months.
No, that's how we got started. It was just small specialty roasters, and sometimes they grow up and sometimes they get bigger and sometimes they don't, but they're still, that's kind of the heart and the soul of it is, people who have passion and people who care about the product. That's how we started. In the early days, I would just go to the library and get the phone book from Chicago, for instance, and go to the Yellow Pages and go under the C's and just call people.
Was there kind of a high-end market at this point? The names you've listed so far, like Cameron's and Caribou, were definitely ahead of the trend at the time in terms of the standard quality of coffee. Or did that develop later in the process?
I think it came later. I mean, like you said, it grew up into the third wave, and people who were, like intelligentsia and counterculture, and Dwayne in Oregon, Stumptown, and we kind of grew up with it. It was just, I mean, it's really, when people ask me, I'd say it's just really dumb luck, hard work, and that kind of stuff that got us where we were, and good timing. Because my partner Jason, who started doing all this doing all the sourcing, used to be a big part of Cup of Excellence. So we do, and I would too. We do Cup of Excellence juries, because that's where you find which part of the countries are the best producers and who are the best producers. We learned after 10 years of Cup of Excellence competitions in Colombia that all of the winners were coming from the South. They're all coming from Nariño and Tolima and Huila. So that's where we buy all our coffee. And you meet some of the people, like we met a producer in El Salvador because he won the contest. So Jason would go down there with Jeff Watts and Dwayne from Stumptown, and they would pick out coffees, and then we would bring them in for those guys. So they were just getting better. They're ramping up. The SCA was ramping up with the Roasters Guild and the Barista Guild, and I guess technology was coming, playing a big part of the brewing process and that kind of stuff too.
It's funny to hear names like Stumptown that just I geek out on when you look at it. To me, it's like, oh, this is like a heritage. Like this is one of the leaders at that time. What is someone like Stumptown? Is it
one dude?
That's what I'm saying. Is like it's funny to hear these names, but to put it in context, and that has to be kind of part of what plays into still willing to meet with me. Is I look at Stumptown and be like, yeah, of course they were always that. And then you're like, no, it started with one guy really ahead of his time with really great coffee.
Right.
Was it more of a push or a pull with the coffees you were sourcing? Did you source these Cup of Excellence coffees and then find the right people for them? Or did you have people like Dwayne at Stumptown saying, hey, we want to push the boundaries or really up the quality here?
I guess it's a combination. I mean, I know we were doing, in the early days when we were doing stuff with Dunn Brothers, they weren't that big, but we would find something that was really remarkable, and we would sort of split it. Like there was a good coffee from Atitlan out of Guatemala, and they're like, yeah, we can take 125 bags, and we're like, great, we'll take 125 bags and sell that and make that available to anybody who's around. But I mean, I guess to answer your question, that it was sort of just you have to have those things on the shelf. It's just like a wine store or a high-end grocery store. You can't. If you're out of bread one day and then the next day you're out of bread, then people are going to go somewhere else. So we have to kind of stock the shelves with levels of quality, because we know that roasters have the same issues that we do. Is we have some people who want really top stuff, and some people need to sell, maybe to the gas station next door just to kind of turn the wheels, So you end up with levels of quality.
Outside of the initial relationship you already had with the farm in Brazil, how do you go about finding farms to start sourcing from? You said you started noticing great coffees coming out of the southern region of Colombia. How did you stumble upon that?
So, I mean, it's a little bit different. That's the difficult thing about coffee, is every origin is unique and completely different. Like you were saying about Nicaragua. Yeah, to get coffee out of Nicaragua, you have to drive it to Honduras because they don't have a port. So it's FOT. So, the SCA and the shows played a big part in that. I went to Nicaragua, and we used to go there just to meet the farmers and try to learn what's behind this. What is it about Antigua that's unique? What is it about Atitlan that's unique? And in Costa Rica's Terrazú and other regions. So we were always trying to push the boundaries and explore new territories and new regions and find top-notch producers. So going to Cup of Excellence, going to the SCA and seeing those shows and meeting people, and it's just a constant. I mean, just today I was just emailing an Indian shipper that I've never talked to before. I'm trying to, because I know somebody who has this coffee and it's outstanding. So we're constantly scouring the world for new partners or better partners or good partners.
When you find a good partner and you're tasting the coffees and it's got a unique story and it's the quality standards that you're looking for, how do you begin that relationship? Is it a short term kind of like, we'll do it this year and then we'll talk next year, or is the goal with a new farmer to build a longer lasting relationship?
From our perspective, it's I work in Colombia primarily. That's been my origin for the last 10 years, and because it's also a really diverse country, and it's a great sort of I don't want to say training ground, but it's where because I'm there and I'm like in the field. I'm like, what's with the pink beans? And they're like, oh, it's a type of bourbon. I'm like, what do you do with it? And he goes, we just mix it together. And I said, so it's a pink bourbon you're saying? And he's like, yeah, we just mix it together. I'm like, could you keep it separate? So and then at one point we were like, I was like, wow, coffees from Cauca taste a lot different than coffees from Huila. And they're like, yeah, it's a different weather pattern, even though it's just right across the mountain. So it's terroir. So I'm like, that's just like Sonoma Valley, or some other, different. That's terroir. That's regional differences. So why don't we call these regional selects and do so that's kind of been our proving ground. But to answer your question about the farmers, the challenge for us sometimes is one year the farm might be outstanding and the coffees are 90 points, and the next year it's not. So we want to be there for them all the time. So we kind of can create these tiers, like if it's 90 points, we'll pay you $5. If it's 88 points or 86 points, we'll pay you $2.50. And if it's 80 points, it's going to be less money, and you have to understand that. So to try to be a good partner long term, for in good times and bad.
Yeah, and even knowing that if it's not that same coffee, that there's still a deal in place has to be pretty beneficial for farms, because this is coming from the beer world. I find there are a lot of parallels between beer and coffee, especially with craft beer and what happened with that and what's happening now with third wave coffee. And one of the funny case studies in beer is the biggest challenge comes down to the hops, is how do you find these specialty hops? And Budweiser, what they would do is go to farms that were growing these amazing hops, and they go, we just need you to grow Magnum because it's super high alpha acid, means we have to use very little of it to be able to bitter the beer enough. Does that happen in coffee where someone with enough buying power would go in and say, hey, we just need this quality. It's low, it's cheap, it's what we do, but we'll buy your entire lot?
When it gets into the big and cheap, then you're kind of in the commercial coffee sector, and we don't really work there. I mean, yes, like Vietnam. I mean, they didn't ever grow coffee at all, and then USAID went in there and started planting coffee. Teaching them how to grow coffee in the 90s. And now they're the second largest producer in the world, and it's Robusta. So we don't use it. It's all in the coffee sector. But yeah, so somebody got them to plant that kind of coffee. But I guess in our sector, a lot of the stuff that's been happening lately is in varietals. Like SL28 from Kenya, or the Pink Bourbon, or the Geishas. Are happening in Panama. So these guys know that if they just see it because now everybody's connected now, so they know that wow, this geisha sold for $300, or that these contest coffees that was a Pink Bourbon sold for $50. So they do it they plant them on their own.
From a business perspective, was there ever the temptation to get into the Robusta game, to get into the C? What's the motivation behind it? I have to imagine there are some incredibly large contracts for Robusta, for C commodity coffee. How and why were you able to never be tempted by that? Because I have to imagine the dollars out there are pretty astounding.
It's, I guess it's personal preference. It's like beer. I mean, it's like I don't buy the $2 Chuck. I like good wine. I mean, that's wine, but I mean beer, and I don't drink like Coors and Budweiser these days when I can find a juicy IPA that's so tasty and full of flavor and produced by a local craft person. I want to support the food industry and the local businesses, and I think like probably 70% of the world coffee is in the commercial sector, and it's controlled by like 4 or 5 major multinationals that are doing cocoa, sugar, rubber, coffee, and that's not my style.
So just the quality that's a really good thing it's good because I think sometimes it happens to me on the coffee roaster side is you go, gosh, if we could just lower the price a little bit, we might be able to attract some of these really big restaurant groups that don't care about their coffee. But then you realize, but then you're competing with something that's not what we do. It's not, we don't get excited about it. And I think that always translates. So when you launch in 1993, you get that first crop and you sell the first one because of the timing of the price. How quickly do things start to grow, and when do you consider like the real, like getting into the groove of the business happened after launching?
I think I waited tables for the first 3 years, if that's gives you any sense. So we were married, and my wife was pregnant, and this is when I got into this business because I was trying to get into grad school. So 2 years I had applied to grad school and didn't get in, and then I got married, and then we got pregnant, and then she's like, maybe you should get a job. So that's when he launched into that. And
I'd say the specialty coffee world got really lucky that you didn't get into business school.
Maybe. But so one of the big mistakes we made is we thought that we could do it with one origin. We thought we should just trade Brazilian coffees. And then we realized that, these guys, that's just one of their ingredients. They're using Colombian. So then we started branching out into Colombians. And we were honestly buying, I did some Nicaraguans directly with a really great group, but we were buying some other origins from Royal Coffee and Kencaf Coffee in Toronto, other bigger importers, to kind of make the whole package. But at that point, Vito and I were still delivering coffee, so we drove to Chicago. I drove to Chicago every 2 weeks with a load of coffee and carried it in, turned around and came home.
That's awesome. So it's that and that's so important to hear for me sometimes, and also for anyone that's trying to do business, because you just assume, you go to Cafe Imports and it's just doing millions of pounds of green. There must just be a big machine behind this. And to have started it out of a truck and waiting tables for 3 years, how long until after that did things start to really gain momentum?
It was just slow and gradual growth. We just kind of grew. I mean, we were, when you're that small, you're growing at 100% or 200% every year, just little by little. But I remember, 1997, maybe I think I was making like $40,000. So I've, could quit my waiting job.
Yeah.
And then it's just like step by step. And then, so like my partner, Jason, he was a trader, like a commodities trader, and his wife is from here. I think he's from Indiana, and they ended up moving here, and he had a midlife crisis at the age of maybe he was 40, and his wife was working at the Mayo, and he was roasting coffee in his garage, and he's a big food nerd and beer nerd and brewing his own beer and hard ciders, and got a sample roaster, and he came in one day to pick up some samples, and we was cupping coffee with the guy from B&W, and I said, he's joined us in the cupping table, and we were talking about our kids. And he told me later, he said, I've never in my work experience had anybody talked about children with anybody in my work experience. This is so weird to me. And he's like, I can come in and hedge your book, because we have to hedge commodities, which once you get to a certain size, because if you buy the coffee, the market's $2 and then it drops, you have to have a mechanism to lower the price with the commodity market. So he's like, I'll hedge your book for you, and just to hang out here, and that kind of was a sort of a pivotal moment, because we were getting to the size where we couldn't afford to not be, taking the risk out of the inventory that we owned.
Is that something you were actively pursuing, or was it just like, that'll happen someday?
I didn't even know it existed.
There are so many things that I've had along in just 2 years. I'm like, man, I wish I would have known about this like a year ago. My life would be so much easier.
English major. I always, like bad debt. We lost a lot of money when people were going, just because they were too nice. We're like, sure. They're like, we'll pay you next week. We'll pay you next month. And then it rolls into $30,000 and they shut their doors, kind of thing. My wife's like, you can't afford any more learning experiences.
I think that's really accurate.
Yeah.
Once he starts hedging the coffee and starts streamlining things, what become the priority as you're growing as a business? Do you have a 5-year plan in place? You're like, in 5 years, this is probably where we'll be. So here's A, B, C that needs to get done. Or is it kind of flying by the seat of the pants?
We were flying by the seat of our pants. I remember in those days we had our Post-it notes were our contract number. So there was a Word document. You write a contract on a Word document. You got to get the Post-it note, and that's your contract number. So we didn't have a system. We had to, at one point we hired a company from Louisiana. There's a business consulting company to come in and give us just some overarching advice, and and it was really helpful, like how to price your coffees, how to compensate employees, some business structure.
How did you find a company in Louisiana to help you with that?
I don't even remember. It was just, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't remember. It was a businessconsulting.com or something like that.
I think I struggle with that sometimes, that I think well, no one knows my business. I can't hire someone to tell me how to do business.
Yeah.
And then you realize you go, oh, I don't really know anything. And they've seen 1,000 case studies of what I'm doing right now. And their advice is probably much better strategically than what I'm doing.
Yeah. And honestly, you know, over the last 10 years, it's probably people. I mean, we had a CFO years ago who's gone now, who was from a business environment. So he actually put a lot of things in place that we lacked, you know, just like systems and organization and stuff. And it just wasn't a good fit because he was an accountant. We were sort of like the supply side economics, just spend money. Let's just have a party, then customers will come. And he's like, no, you can't.
What's the ROI on a party? Exactly. I need to be able to write this off and balance it in the books.
Yeah, but then also young, innovative, smart people. And you know Noah, right?
Yeah.
Yes, from a sales perspective. I mean, other people who are also passionate and share the same values, but then can work in another function.
As you're bringing in all these coffees, where are you storing them initially? You said you're driving trucks down to Chicago. Where's all the green coffee that you're bringing in being stored?
Yeah, and our initial warehouse is kind of right up the street from our office now on 1621 East Hennepin. We had a little warehouse and we had just a pallet jack, and we could store about a container and a half of coffee there. And then we took more of that space, and then we eventually moved to Energy Park Drive with a bigger warehouse and an office. We just keep just slow growth and continue to, you know, need more space. I mean, coffee is one of those things that's only harvested once a year.
Yeah.
So, and we sell guats all year long. So when the guat crop comes in, we get all of them and sit on them.
That to me is terrifying as a business owner, where I'm like, okay, we're growing somewhere between 100 and 200% this year. This market continues to grow. And also, I need to just decide how much of this Guatemala we're going to sell this year. Did you find customers would be flexible with you on which coffee was offered, or would they get upset that you're like, this Guatemala's out, you told us you'd have it for the full year? How did that relationship work with these more established partners that need, especially in the second wave, they need a consistent bean and roast on an annual basis? Yeah,
well, some of the bigger ones, or some of the bigger customers will just contract. I mean, I have some customers like that, like Dunn Brothers, for instance, or Cameron's, that would they do a 6-month contract. So then we need to know that we need to time it like that Jan, Feb, March period is delicate or dicey because new crop centrals are coming in, new crop Mexicans are coming in, and if the crop is late, then you can be in trouble. So it's delicate. But every year we get together and we talk about what we have and what's selling, and then take a guess.
And so if they have a 6-month contract and they end up selling more of that than they thought, then at least they go, well, you did your part on the contract. Yeah. We'll be more flexible at that point. So it's almost meeting in the middle on just trying to get the planning side of it done, because that's the side that's so above my head on the importing side, especially after going to that meeting and just learning that, oh, you don't even know what day this is going to arrive. And you go, well, it's probably some part here in the ocean, we think, and the technology that's increasing to be able to track things. How much has that changed since you started, of being able to like hone in that delivery process and knowing where things are and when they'll land?
You know, I think the technology has improved greatly, but you're still shipping coffee from a third world country or Africa. And that's the part that's just there's not that sort of urgency there that we have here or that you see in Europe. Like, it's like, yeah, we haven't shipped it yet, but we're going to. I'm like, okay.
The thing I bought from you? Like, I thought once I paid that just hits the ground.
Yeah.
When you're working with these farms, what kind of, outside of the quality of the coffee, what are you looking for in a farm that Cafe Imports does work with or will work with?
Well, I think primarily because our values are to increase the livelihood of everybody in the chains, you know, through education. And so I think we're looking for partners that do good work. You know, we don't, like, there's an exporter out of Ethiopia that once we went to visit him, we could see that the employees, the people that were working there, were not happy, and there were people, you know, like guards around with guns, and we could see him bribing people, and we're just like, this doesn't feel right, you know. And we learned later that he's kind of a bad actor. So we're looking for people who share our values in doing good things and supporting small producers and, you know, top quality coffees. I mean, if a small producer, the average farm in Colombia, Southern Colombia, is 1.5 hectares or 3 acres. So they're going to produce maybe 50 bags of coffee a year, So if you can help them move up that food quality chain, then they can get more money, So if we can go in there with, like, our export partner out of Colombia, Ben Export, they have an agronomist that goes in and says, listen, you need to ferment this a little longer. And if you ferment it longer, it will be better. Or you need to fertilize more often. You need to fertilize twice a year. And if you do that, you'll get more money, kind of thing,
And so it's working with the farms that if you can do these things, the quality of the coffee will increase. And that's coffee to me was a taste first driven thing. I had that first cup. I've said it on this podcast probably 10 times, but it was Sump Coffee down in St. Louis. I'm sure you're familiar with them. They're this amazing high-end roaster.
Oh, I know him, yeah.
Yeah. He's got the big old beard, Scott, yeah. And he's another guy that I'm not sure if he knows who I am, but I was just like that guy that kept showing up to the shop and asking all these stupid questions. But I had that first cup, and it was just like, it was an empty shop at the time just because it was the afternoon. I was like, what'd you do to this? And the barista explained it, and I go, oh, I need to know absolutely everything about this. And so it was a taste first driven thing. But what really led to me wanting to do this as a business is from top to bottom, specialty coffee, high end is specifically the good it can do.
Absolutely.
And the kind of upsetting thing about that is on the other side that the kind of standards and norms that have been in place for so many decades, that people look at what we do and they're like, oh, your coffee is at grocery $14.99 on shelf, or online can go up to $20. Why are you so expensive? And I go, anything less than what we're charging for some of our coffees, and you're probably buying coffee that has unethical practices going on with it. And that's what was a little disturbing, but also very exciting about the industry growing, is that this other aspect that's like what you do, and only working in specialty coffee and never even really considering the C grade just because of everything, the quality, the ethics, that what has to go on for it to be that cheap. It's like, oh, if I can grow my business, and as Cafe Imports grows, there's beneficiaries along the entire supply chain, not just the importer, not just the end roaster. And that's what was really exciting to me. And obviously, as it lies today, fair trade and organic are just, everybody knows what these terms mean. They've been marketed to the point where people just like kind of expect this, or at least know very well what it is. Was this something people were talking about when you launched in '93? Were customers asking, is this fair trade organic?
No, I think that's about the time that fair trade came around.
Okay.
And it was the guy from Peace Coffee who was kind of instrumental in getting it started here in Minneapolis. Headwaters, I think, was the name of the organization. So it was new. And it was, it also got a lot of press in the early days. It got a lot of press in the New York Times, and it was pushed a lot in the churches, so it got a lot of traction. But a lot of people didn't quite understand it, and especially from the origin side.
Because it seems to be a pretty complex issue when you break down into it, because you can pay, there's a fair trade price, and you can pay well above that. But it could be not fair trade certified. So that's where it gets kind of complicated of, what is and I'm just kind of like trying to get a better understanding of this, because I basically pick everyone's brain about this that I can, is what is the big difference between a coffee where I'm paying above a fair trade price versus a coffee that's fair trade certified at the same price? Like what's going on at origin with the importers? What all has to happen for that process of certification? Okay,
so the fair trade coffees, it's a FLO, fair trade labeling organization based out of Denmark, I think somewhere in Europe, who started this. And it basically, in simplest terms, it's kind of like a subsidy. If the C market goes below $1.20, you pretend that it didn't. I mean, the fair trade minimum is $1, so maybe it's $1.40. So $1.90 is the fair trade minimum price. And 25 cents of that is the organic premium, and 25 cents of it is the social premium that goes to the association. So when the market drops below 140, you just pretend that it didn't. So you're always paying that minimum of $1.90.
And so for coffee that's not fair trade certified, so let's say we've got like a coffee that's sitting at $4. You have a $4 pound for green coffee, and then the market is at $1.20, and then it dips down to, let's just say, $1. Is that coffee that's fair trade certified going to stay at $4, or would that go to $3.80? The
fair trade one would stay. If you're at under 120, it's never going to get any cheaper, unless the green importer has hedged it. Then he can afford afford to lower the price.
Okay. That makes no.
So every once in a while
sense.
you'll see that happen. What we tend when the market's, but there's also coffees out there that are just $3.
Yeah.
And, Ethiopian naturals or Ethiopian Yirgachefs or some Kenyans that are they're just $5 because that's what the market will bear.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. It was a really tough choice for me early on because there's a lot of grocers and co-ops and customers that say, I won't look at something unless it's certified and you can send me that certification. Sure. And Ethiopia was actually one of the big motivating factors that I go, well, it's rare to find a fair trade certified Ethiopia because all their coffees are above fair trade price and it would cost them money to continue to sell the same coffee.
But sometimes you have coffees that a lot of our fair trade organic coffees are more than the minimum because they're really good.
Yeah. And that's where it took me a long time to dig through it, where I was like, wait, a fair trade's $1.20. Like we would never even get close to that. So where is this premium? But then you realize that the organization, it's like the big values probably around that, the farms producing primarily that quality of coffee. Is that fair to say? And then that if you're producing coffees that hover around that C price or just above, that would be the big protection? Or what do you think?
Well, most of the fair trade producers are cooperatives. So it's an association of a number of producers that band together, just like the dairy co-ops do here and utilize, buying power to buy fertilizers or to reuse trucks and such. So the co-op is certified and then they would then distribute that social premium, but there is also going to be a premium on quality just because if it's the Guatemalan Huehue Tenango that's cupping at 86 points, it's worth more than $1.90.
Yeah.
The C market's $1.25 like it is today. Those coffees are at least, $2.30 or something because they're good. And they should be.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the funny thing is that's what we decided is you know what we're going to choose. We're going to make sure the ethical side is taken care of. And so that's why we're super particular about the importers we work with, the farms we work with, that let's make sure like the ethical transparency is there to make sure that not only that the prices seems fair, but also that everybody's being treated well in the process. And by picking on taste, generally you're going to find coffees that are well above that price because if it's going to match the quality that we're looking for, and that's kind of how we do it.
Yeah, and you'd see the same thing in good wines or good beers too. They're people who care about the process and they care about the ingredients and they care about all the things that surround that. So can I ask you a question? The coffee in St. Louis at Stump, was it
Stump, S-U-M-P,
that's right.
yeah.
He was on a tour of ours. So this guy's like 6'4".
Yeah, so some their branding is so cool. It's like their branding is a skull with a big beard, and then you see Scott, he's really tall guy with a big beard, and it's just like.
And so we're in Colombia on a Best Cup tour, so we have like 20 clients there, and every day we go and cup coffees. Then we get in this bus, like this open Chiva bus, and we drive up to and visit a farm. But everywhere we go, people were just freaked out because these are Colombian people that are like 4 foot tall, and they're just like, oh my God, he's going to eat me. But it was really fun to have him on a tour in the countryside of Colombia.
Yeah, and he's just like then the nicest, most intentional guy, and just that was my first interaction with somebody that like was talking about coffee in a way where I just tore through their YouTube channel. And I was just talked about coffee in a way that I go, I didn't even know this world existed. Yeah.
So what was it about that cup? Was the roast or the brewing mechanism?
A little bit of everything. Okay. It was a natural Ethiopian Yirgachefs where like the coffee specialty nerds' eyes are rolling back of the head. Oh, natural Yirgachefs. Oh, I remember my first cup, but it was literally my first cup.
Yeah.
And I always recommend naturally processed coffees for someone who's like, why do you get excited about this? Because it's so different. It's I know now that's like they're from a scoring perspective, from a just perception within the industry that coffee is kind of like the played out coffee sometimes. But I'm like, but there are people who've never had a cup that if they tasted something that had notes of blueberries popping out of it, that like that's going to blow someone's mind. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that's the coffee we launched with, and you send that out to people, and it's funny because for the first 6 months, the only people buying Folly are people I know personally. But the best comment I can get is like, whoa, this is actually what you were saying it was.
Yeah.
And when you say something tastes like blueberries, it's again, I think people have been given tasting notes about coffee. Folgers is going to tell you that we only source the best, and it's dark, dark chocolate, and then they taste it, and you're like, oh, this is bitter, and that's all it is. And so when they hear somebody say blueberries, they're like, that sounds bogus. But it was just getting that. It was just black coffee, and at that point, I was a sales rep for Sam Adams, so my only coffee was just functional, just as big a size you have. I drink it black so that I'm not taking in too much sugar throughout the day, and it's just like you choke it down, and then you feel awake. And that was the first cup that I was thinking about it as I was drinking it. And I was a huge beer nerd at Sam Adams. Like Cicerone certification I had just tried to pursue the advanced exam, the first one they hosted, and I missed it by 3 points. And I was studying for 3 hours a day for 4 months. And then this was right after that happened. And so I was like, I'm going to take at least a month off before I start studying like that again. And so I had this big void. I had built it into my routine that I'm going to study for 2 to 3 hours a day. And then that disappeared. And so I think part of it was the combination of that blew my mind from a taste perspective. And I'd been training tasting for 3 years at that point. And I didn't have the coffee vocabulary, but there were things in it that I go, this is wild. It did remind me of like red wine, that like you get some crazy like natural wines that have these notes that you go, I've never tasted something like that. Combined with the whole world that I didn't know existed, and then the void that I had from not studying, it was like you dropped a match on some dry kindling in a dry forest.
Nice.
And so, I was fortunate that at the time I was in St. Louis, or I was actually Champaign, Illinois at the time, but quickly moved to St. Louis when I got a promotion, and having Sump Coffee there, and Blueprint is another great roaster down there that there's these two shops that are really pushing the boundaries nationally on coffee, and I just got fortunate that they happened to be in my backyard. And I also had a coworker who used to sell specialty coffee. I can't even recall for who at this point, but he would give me recommendations on where to go.
Sure.
And so, I had your classic, like that natural Yirgacheffe. I want natural thing, whatever that is. I want all those. And then you start learning about wash process, and you learn about different and origin, and then it just snowballed. And it really was. I did Coffee Fest in Nashville in early March, and that was where I was like, I think I might be doing this as a business. And then I was deciding, if I'm going to do this, where would I do it? Because I'm from Minnesota, but I didn't want to do it just because of that. I didn't want to force it in a place where it wouldn't work. But I came back and I go, there's some roasters doing amazing things here, but I think there's a lot of room. When you look at Minnesota from terms like craft beer, craft spirits, farm to table food, the intentionality behind what people consume here, I go, there's room. And then I came back, and that's where I met you. Where I was like, but the missing part is like, I don't know where to get the coffee. How do I source coffees? How do I know it's good coffee? At that point I was confident in my tasting abilities, but like, who's going to roast the coffee? Because I started to roast, and I was like, this cannot be me.
What roaster did you get?
I had the Aleo Bullet R1. Okay. So I was roasting, 500 grams just to learn. I wanted to learn how it worked. And that's where you realize, this isn't just making a bean brown. Right. And especially when you're working with really high end coffee, roasting really lightly. And so, that meeting with you is really pivotal, because I not only realized that, this amazing importers in my backyard, and he'd be cool with me getting one bag at a time, which was hugely helpful. But also the fact that like you were willing to just tour, and that it was like, because that was my big worry, is how do you get anyone to take you seriously when you go, I have no professional experience. I know we've never met. And you can name the laundry list of reasons to why I'm not going to waste my time with this guy. And that act was like, this industry is full of amazing people doing really great things. And in the high end, especially, I think you find very intentional people. And it's cool that when I ask you, did you ever think about C-grade? You're like, no. Even though like I'm sure there's massive opportunities. And that's kind of how it started. It was, some coffee in St. Louis, and then everywhere within 4 hours, and then getting Southwest flights to both coasts, and then that's where I was like, this is going to happen.
Right.
Yeah. And the first coffee we sourced was, I picked it up at Cafe Imports, natural Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, and then was working like 4 jobs and used that money to buy the next 3 or 4 bags, and then we started going from there. But just even your team it was so impactful in Folly, because I had no idea what I was doing. So I would just ask, our sales reps and be like, what would you do if I wanted a coffee to be like this? And to be like, you should get this one. And that was what was really impressive to me, is the willingness to bend over backwards for someone where it's like, I know the time you're spending with me is probably disproportionate in terms of like ROI in a business sense, but at no point did I ever get the sense that what I was doing was like annoying, or just, which I get super self-conscious about in the spectrum of coffee, especially. How did you decide to grow like the team in terms of like, what are the next hires, or who should we hire next? Is it, again, I feel like I might know the answer at this point. Did you have a plan of this will be our next hire? Or is it we have too much?
Yeah, that's usually you're just like, banging your head against the walls because there's just too much to do. And, I have some friends who are like, they're more commercial traders. So he works in New York, a guy from Minnesota actually, and there's 3 traders at his desk, and they all wear suits, and they all sit at a desk, and they probably do 5 times the coffee that we do. Where we have, we have 30 people in Minneapolis, because we take the time to talk to smaller roasters. So we have 8 salespeople and 3 customer service. Well, we had 4 customer service reps before COVID, but just because it takes that much time to talk about and to sell 1 bag of coffee, you'll be on the phone for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's hard sometimes because, when you get like a brand new person, they're like, so coffee comes from a tree, right? And I'm like, okay.
And it's
I'm
like,
going to be here for 30 minutes.
you find someone with a new business that's so excited.
Yeah.
Like me.
But we do that.
And it's like, I want to talk about coffee for hours.
Right.
And thankfully I'm like, they don't have hours.
But I have customers that were from the early days, like Door County Coffee in Door County, Wisconsin. I used to drive there with a van full of coffee, and it's a 7-hour drive. And I used to do it once a month. And they've been buying all of their coffee from me for 20 years. I mean, I think that's also how you build that kind of loyalty. It's a relationship. Vicky started this business it wasn't in Door County. It was another town on the lake, and it was all women. So this, 25 years ago, to start an all women's business in the countryside in Wisconsin, that was gutsy. Yeah. So it was a women-owned business, women-run business, and we have just a relationship, a rapport that we've built over 20-some years, and she buys all of it from me now.
And that's something that in today's world of business, I think everybody wants, I have this revolutionary idea. It's work smarter, not harder all the time. And I'm just going to put this idea down. I'll take off on its own. When in reality, most businesses, that is not the case, especially in coffee. It's one of the running jokes is like, hey, I designed this new brewer that's going to change everything. And you're like, okay, well, I mean, it's a pour over, but it's this shape. And you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. I thought that's where that was going. But I think the other part of coffee is you find a lot of passionate people, but also a lot of really hard workers. There's industries where you could make more money. I mean, even just alluding to the C market, if you really want to trade commodities, there's a lot more like chance of becoming fabulously wealthy through that. When you're hiring people, or I should say when you were, and when you are evaluating new people, do you have a process of like what you're looking for in that person? Where do you value experience in coffee versus like this is a good fit for the team?
Usually it's more of the good fit for the team, and it's also smart people, because smart people can kind of figure out how to do all kinds of things. That's kind of something that we're always looking for. But these days we tend to have the sales team. We have a number of people interview the candidate, for instance, somebody from accounting, somebody from sensory analysis, and a couple salespeople, and try to get a sense of what kind of a person this is and would it be a good fit. And then it's really their teammates kind of choose the people. But we tend to hire people that have coffee experience, but probably not green coffee experience. So they know how to make a pour over and how to pull a shot, and they've been baristas or worked in coffee shops, so they know what their clients are facing. But the idea is to have them kind of be fresh and kind of work their way up the ranks, start as a customer service representative, then become a salesperson sort of thing.
I like the idea of being interviewed across, like getting interviewed by an accountant to me would be like, what are we doing here? But because I think a really classic divide you find in companies, sales versus the world, is like you can get that mentality, and then the business has to choose, like, oh shoot, do we value the sales team on this one or the other side? And that's an interesting way that probably helps a lot with that issue, that if it's like, hey, accounting signed off on this hire too, it's like we're all accountable.
Yeah, it's still sales versus the world.
Yeah, I know that, and it's salespeople always going to be right.
Exactly.
No, it's I'm realizing more and more that's not the case. Third world coffee, or not third world. I'm sorry, third wave coffee. Mm-hmm. When did this become? Actually, I guess I should start and say, like, how big of a part of your business is it? Is it a big part of the green coffee, or is it like different from the revenue side just because it's like a higher priced coffee? Like, is it I guess I'm trying to figure out a good way to phrase this. Is third world as big a deal in the importing side as it is on like the cultural side here in the U.S.?
Third wave?
Third wave. Okay. I'm sorry. I keep saying third world. I'm sorry. We were talking about third world countries earlier.
I mean, I think that was kind of a pivotal, substantive move in specialty coffee to make, really high end special coffees important, and to establish those relationships, and really kind of like it also kind of started that huge trend of roasters traveling to origin, because we were doing that with Cup of Excellence, and it was with a group. I mean, I think. Like Jason's first trip to Brazil was with SCAA, and they went on a big bus with Ted Lingo, who's the president of SCAA, and some people signed up for that, but it was an organized like tour thing. But then when Cup of Excellence came along, you'd go by yourself. I mean, I went to Nicaragua once with CQI as a cupper, because they wanted cuppers to evaluate the coffees, and you to get there. So this kind of opened up this world you just fly to San Jose and you get a taxi to take you to the thing, and then the farmer picks you up and they take you to their farm, kind of stuff. And that has been huge. So, I mean, third wave was probably 15 years ago when those guys started, something like that, maybe more, when Cup of Excellence was doing that. So for the last 20 years, small roasters who probably don't have the budget to go to Colombia twice a year, go down there and try to pick out their coffees, and they want to meet the farmers.
Right. So, and how is it broken down? So would you find that you're working with a lot more roasters of smaller quantity than 10 years ago?
No, that's always been our model.
Okay. And because that's kind of what I was trying to.
Them.
Right. And because that's exactly what happened in craft beer too, is it went from, the main 3 breweries to all of a sudden now there's thousands, and it's like neighborhood breweries.
Mm-hmm. And we have that occasion where smaller roasters get bigger, like Ed Dunn sold to somebody who then franchised it. We had a customer in Chicago that was, father and son thing, and they went to Brazil with us, and they got big, and they're still with us, but they're not. So they've kind of changed a little bit, where they're buying futures contracts and they're buying full containers, and they're booking 6 months out. Where the little smaller guys are just like, hey, I want that farm again. I want that same farm that I had. I want Daniel Munoz's coffee again, like I did last year, because he went down there with us, and we went to Daniel Munoz's farm, and Daniel fed us a sancocho and gave us beer and took a walk around the coffee, and you get to know him, and the coffee was 88 points, so of course he wants it again.
It's something that it seems like you'd want to work with bigger people. You're working with one contact point. It's a single purchase of a large order, but I imagine by having a lot of roasters, like you said, you have a huge sales team and a lot more support than a larger company even has. But also, it does probably minimize some risk that if a Dunn Brothers decides 1 year, hey, we're switching importers, that's got to be something that is mitigated by working with a larger number of smaller roasters. That, hey, Folly with that first year where I'm buying a bag, if I decide to go somewhere else, it's like, okay, we still want to work with you, but and that's something I'm learning, because that's happened a couple times now, where you invest all your time and energy into something that they go, oh, okay, we're just switching now, and you go, oh, okay.
We had a customer here that was started out where I used to drive the coffee down there in the back of the truck, and they got bigger, and they bought another company here, and then they got bigger and bigger, and they got to the side. We actually said no and decided to not work with them, because it was just because the quality's As they got bigger and got into grocery store on a national level, the qualities kind of dropped. So they went from Serra Negras to like a Brazil 2-3. Then they went to another smaller screen Brazil. And we have the risk that if something happens to them, we own that coffee, and that coffee doesn't fit with our other stuff. So we said, a few years ago, no thanks. We're not going to. And it was a lot of volume, but it just got to the point where they got big and it just didn't fit our inventory. We didn't want to own those coffees if they had trouble.
I can't even imagine the conversations behind closed doors on that one. Holy smokes.
And it was because it was I'm the sales guy on that one. So I'm like, come on.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine.
Yeah. But it's like the farther you delineate from the core mission, right, it's the less unique you become. And in this world, especially of coffee, it's so hard to be unique in any way.
Right.
That makes me.
So to answer your previous question about the producers, we have a group in Colombia that we've been working with for a long time, Los Naranjos, and I've been going there for years.
Yeah, we were just roasting their coffee.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful program.
It's
And
amazing.
the coffee's delicious.
Yeah.
But I took those guys a moisture meter one time because I was like, how do you guys check moisture? They go, well, we shake it like this next to our ear. I'm shaking my hand next to my ear. Or we bite it. I'm like, there's a thing called a moisture meter that it tells you if it's 11%, because they take the coffee to town, and if it's 12%, they got to take it home. And taking it to town means putting it in the back of a bus or on a horse or a wagon. A lot of them don't have cars. They have motorcycles, So just to establish this relationship with them. Well, then I was a juror in Cup of Excellence in Colombia, and the winning coffee was Arnulfo Leguizamo, who's a member of the Los Naranjos Association that I gave this moisture meter to, and I've been buying his coffee for 5 years. So I had to buy it.
Yeah.
And it was $41. a pound.
To put that in perspective for someone that I don't know who is that's not a coffee person would be listening at this point of the podcast, but $41 would be well above 10 times or about 10 times, 10, 11 times normal price for we're doing, what specialty coffee does.
But he bought a truck, still has that truck, so he could take his coffee to town. He put his kids went to college, and he took his family to see the ocean. They'd never seen the ocean before. So that's the kind of relationship impact we can make at Origin with these guys, And this is the tagging on that third wave thing of going to Origin like the third wave guys did, and meeting the producers and buying their coffees and supporting them year after year.
And
it's impactful.
That's the beautiful thing about it is if you help them, it not only helps you because you're going to get coffees that you can charge more for and higher quality coffees, but also the impact it can have on them. And we haven't. This was our year that we're going to get to go to Origin for the first time. Obviously, that got thrown off, so we're going to place a heavier emphasis on it when things normalize a bit here.
Yeah.
But that's the major thing I hear, that it's like you don't know exactly what you're doing as a business until you do that, and then making choices about coffees becomes very simple.
Exactly.
And that's what I'm looking forward to about it. And obviously, this year's. It's the least of all of our problems, right, or with everything going on. But that's the number one thing I hear from roasters. That's like the first time you go to Origin, then you really realize that the green coffee, you can look at pictures, you can see the farm that it's coming from, but until you experience and have those interactions, that's just not different. And then the irony would be that if you worked in commodity grade coffee, you'd probably go to a farm and realize what you're doing to hurt everybody in that area.
Or they don't go.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, of course, and it's just like you'd almost want to distance yourself from what you're doing.
Yeah, once in a lifetime, or maybe once a year. We did a tour last year with Dunn Brothers, and some of their clients, or any of the tours. We did another tour with their Best Cup, and we went to the Andres Roldan's house. His mom was there, and she had made these little pastry kind of things, and they're serving you coffee, and she brought out some pastries and coffee and juice and that kind of stuff. And then you walk around the back of the thing, the whole family's there, and they're all showered and dressed up to welcome us into their patio. Mm-hmm. Then you go back around the back of the house, and you see that she's been out there, she's cooking with sticks. She's been out there all day long cooking with little chunks of wood to make us pastries that we think are really cute. Yeah, and that's when you realize the disparity here. And that's why you're like, this is not right.
It's
we should pay more for
yeah.
coffee.
And that's the beautiful thing about it, that it's like, hey, if we work harder and we can sell more as a roaster, we can buy more and grow in these relationships too.
Yeah, because wine at the cafe by my house is $9 a glass. So why can't people pay more money for a cup of coffee? That's got to, the Dunn Brothers guy tells me a story. Like, a woman comes in and says, I want coffee for $1. And he said, well, the coffee's more than $1, as you can see. She goes, well, here's $1, put $1 worth of coffee in the cup. My coffee I'm not going to pay more than $1. Hey. And
yeah, when you talk about $1 a cup, you don't even want to know how it got to that dollar of the final cup. Yeah. I think that's a great place and I love that message that I think what you're doing is, I knew some about Cafe Imports just from the tour from a few years ago, but it's inspiring as a business person to hear what you've done through just slow, sustained growth and hard work and just continuing along a singular mission, but also what you've done for the coffee community as you yourself and also Cafe Imports, that you're one of the biggest supporters of all these events we have when that is a thing and hopefully a thing again. And these are the types of things that are really important, that I go to these events and I don't even notice who, like, I don't know who's who, and you see the names and whatever, and you assume, oh, this must be some huge conglomerate that just funnels money in, and you realize that it's one of the specialty coffee importers that's like over investing in, like you said, like, well, let's throw a party and hope people show up. Like, there's no ROI on that. You don't really know, but without like Cafe Imports and some of the bigger players within specialty coffee, these competition circuits, like the things that drive the quality and the enthusiasm and attract new people to the industry, they don't exist. And if that didn't exist, I definitely wouldn't be in coffee because I never would have had a place to go to learn.
Sure.
And so I want to say personally, I appreciate the focus Cafe Imports puts on supporting. And yeah.
Good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate the time. And I will end it there and say, have a nice day.